In 1975, a single night in San Diego changed the art world forever when thieves walked away with $2.4 million in masterpieces from the city's most prestigious gallery. No alarms sounded. No witnesses came forward. No arrests followed. For nearly half a century, the case remained one of California's most puzzling unsolved art thefts, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic neglect and fading memories. Then, in 2023, during a routine authentication process at a small auction house in Phoenix, an X-ray scan of a recovered painting revealed something that would shake the investigation to its core. Hidden within the canvas itself was an audio recording, preserved in silence for 48 years, waiting to tell its story. The theft that started it all took place on a fog-heavy October evening at the Meridian Gallery, an upscale establishment nestled in the heart of San Diego's cultural district. The gallery had built its reputation over 2 decades as a showcase for contemporary American and European works, attracting collectors from across the Southwest. On that particular night, the building housed an exhibition titled Visions of Tomorrow, featuring pieces valued at over $3.2 million. The centerpiece was a collection of abstract expressionist paintings, including works by emerging artists whose careers were just beginning to soar. Gallery owner Margaret Whitfield had personally curated the exhibition, spending months negotiating loans from private collectors and sister institutions. The opening reception 3 weeks earlier had drawn over 400 attendees, including art critics, wealthy patrons, and influential dealers. Local newspapers had praised the show as ambitious and visionary, calling it San Diego's most significant cultural event of the year. What no one anticipated was that the exhibition would become famous, not for its artistic merit, but for what disappeared from its walls. The Meridian Gallery operated under what seemed like adequate security for the era. Motion detectors covered the main exhibition floors. Pressure-sensitive plates lay beneath the most valuable pieces, and a night watchman made hourly rounds through the building. The gallery's insurance policy required these measures, and they had proven sufficient to deter casual break-ins. However, the system had never been tested against professional thieves with inside knowledge and precise timing. At approximately 11:20 p.m. on October 14th, someone disabled the main electrical panel feeding the gallery's security network. The blackout lasted exactly 12 minutes, during which time 7 paintings were carefully removed from their frames and transported out of the building. When power was restored, the motion sensors reset automatically, and the night watchman, George Castellanos, completed his next scheduled round without noticing the theft. The missing works weren't discovered until the following morning, when gallery staff arrived to prepare for the day's visitors. Before we continue unraveling this decades-old mystery, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The stolen paintings represented a carefully selected collection of high-value, portable works. Among them was Fractured Light, a 1974 piece by rising star Elena Vasquez, that had been featured on the exhibition's promotional materials. Also taken were 2 smaller works by established European artists, a mixed-media piece incorporating gold leaf, and 3 contemporary abstracts that had drawn significant attention from collectors during the opening reception. The thieves had bypassed larger, more famous works that would have been difficult to transport or impossible to sell discreetly. Police investigators arrived within hours of the discovery, but the crime scene offered few clues. There were no signs of forced entry through doors or windows. The electrical panel had been accessed using what appeared to be the correct tools and knowledge of the building's infrastructure. Most puzzling was the precision with which the paintings had been removed. Rather than slashing canvases from their frames in haste, the thieves had taken time to properly detach each work, suggesting either professional art handling experience or careful advance planning. Detective Luis Moreno, who led the initial investigation, later described the theft as unusually methodical. The perpetrators had avoided the gallery's most recognizable pieces, those that would immediately trigger alerts in the art world's recovery networks. Instead, they selected works that could potentially disappear into private collections or be sold through less monitored channels. This level of discrimination suggested the involvement of someone with deep knowledge of both the art market and the specific exhibition. The night watchman, George Castellanos, became the primary focus of early questioning. He had worked at the gallery for 18 months without incident, and maintained that his rounds had proceeded normally throughout the evening. Castellanos reported that the power outage had seemed routine, the type of brief interruption that occasionally affected the older building during storms or equipment maintenance. He had continued his patrol using a flashlight, checking locks and perimeter access points, but had not examined individual artworks in the darkness. Investigators found Castellanos' account consistent, but noted several gaps in the timeline. His logbook showed entries at 10:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m., but nothing during the critical window when the power had failed. When pressed, he explained that he had been in the basement mechanical room during a part of that period, investigating what he thought was a heating system malfunction. No such malfunction was later found, and building maintenance records showed no scheduled work that evening. The power company's incident reports revealed that the outage had been localized to a single city block, affecting only the gallery and 3 adjacent buildings. Electrical crews dispatched to investigate found evidence of deliberate tampering with a junction box located in an alley behind the gallery. Someone had accessed the box using proper utility tools and had restored service just as professionally as they had interrupted it. The precision of the operation suggested either an insider or someone with specialized knowledge of the city's electrical grid. Within weeks of the theft, the FBI's art crime team joined the investigation due to the high value of the stolen works and the possibility of interstate transportation. Federal agents interviewed dozens of individuals connected to the gallery, including staff members, frequent visitors, contractors who had worked on recent renovations, and anyone who had attended the opening reception. They also reached out to art dealers, auction houses, and collectors throughout the region, alerting them to watch for the missing pieces. Despite the extensive investigation, no solid leads emerged. The stolen paintings seemed to have vanished completely from the legitimate art market. Undercover agents monitored known fencing operations and black market dealers, but none of the missing works surfaced. The thieves had either hidden their prizes exceptionally well or had connections to buyers who intended to keep the paintings permanently out of public view. Margaret Whitfield, devastated by the loss of works she had spent years acquiring for the exhibition, gradually rebuilt the gallery's reputation and security systems. She installed state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, hired additional guards, and implemented protocols that would make a similar theft nearly impossible. However, the psychological impact of the crime lingered. Several lenders withdrew their pieces early, and the gallery struggled to attract major exhibitions for years afterward. The insurance settlement process dragged on for months, as investigators attempted to determine whether the theft had been facilitated by insider knowledge. Whitfield herself faced intense scrutiny, though no evidence ever suggested her involvement. Several gallery employees underwent repeated interviews, polygraph tests, and background investigations. The prolonged uncertainty took a toll on everyone connected to the institution, from the curatorial staff to the volunteer docents who had guided visitors through the doomed exhibition. As months turned to years, the case gradually faded from public attention. The FBI maintained the file as an active investigation, but with no new leads or evidence, agents were reassigned to more pressing cases. The stolen paintings joined the thousands of artworks that disappear annually into a shadowy underworld of private collectors, criminal organizations, and black market dealers. For the art world, they became another tragic reminder of how easily cultural treasures can vanish without a trace. Yet, somewhere in that silence, hidden within the very fabric of one of those stolen canvases, a secret waited patiently to be discovered. The investigation that had once consumed headlines and FBI resources slowly retreated into the cold case archives. By 1978, active surveillance of art dealers and auction houses had been scaled back. The trail had gone completely cold, leaving behind only a thick file of witness statements, forensic reports, and photographs of empty gallery walls. Detective Moreno, who had dedicated 3 years to the case, was reassigned to homicide investigations. The stolen masterpieces seemed destined to remain lost forever, joining countless other cultural artifacts that had simply vanished into the shadows. Margaret Whitfield eventually sold the Meridian Gallery in 1982, unable to shake the stigma that had attached itself to the establishment. She moved to Portland and opened a smaller, more modest space specializing in local artists and community exhibitions. In rare interviews, she would speak about that October night with a mixture of sadness and bewilderment, still unable to understand how such a carefully planned theft had been executed so flawlessly. The questions that had haunted her for years remained unanswered. Who had possessed such intimate knowledge of the gallery's security systems? How had they moved 7 paintings without leaving a single usable fingerprint or witness account? George Castellanos, the night watchman whose testimony had never fully satisfied investigators, left San Diego entirely in 1979. He moved to Nevada, where he found work in casino security, a job that kept him far from the art world that had brought him such scrutiny. In the few conversations he had with former colleagues, he maintained his innocence, but admitted that the experience had left him deeply shaken. He claimed to have nightmares about that evening, replaying his rounds over and over, searching for details he might have missed. The art world itself began to move on, though the theft left lasting changes in how galleries approached security. Insurance companies raised premiums for institutions that couldn't demonstrate advanced protection systems. The casual, trusting atmosphere that had once characterized smaller galleries gave way to bulletproof glass, laser grids, and armed guards. The Meridian theft became a case study in art security courses, analyzed for its lessons about insider threats and systematic vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, the 7 stolen paintings had indeed disappeared into a carefully constructed network designed to make them untraceable. They didn't surface at major auction houses or established dealers, nor did they appear in the catalogs of legitimate collectors. Instead, they moved through a series of intermediaries who specialized in handling stolen art, each transaction designed to further obscure their origins. False provenance documents were created, ownership histories were fabricated, and the works gradually acquired new identities that bore no resemblance to their true past. Elena Vasquez, the artist whose fractured light had been among the stolen pieces, watched her career take an unexpected turn following the theft. The publicity surrounding the crime had brought her work to national attention, but in a way that felt hollow and disturbing. Collectors began seeking out her other paintings, not for their artistic merit but for their connection to the famous heist. She found herself simultaneously grateful for the exposure and resentful of the circumstances that had created it. The stolen painting had been one of her favorites, a piece that represented a breakthrough in her artistic development. Its loss felt personal, like losing a part of herself. As the 1980s progressed, advances in art recovery technology began to offer new hope for solving old crimes. Computer databases allowed investigators to cross-reference stolen works with pieces appearing at auctions worldwide. Photography and documentation standards improved, making it harder for thieves to alter or disguise stolen paintings. The FBI's art crime team expanded its resources and developed better relationships with international law enforcement agencies. Yet the Meridian Gallery theft remained stubbornly unsolved, its perpetrators having covered their tracks too well for even these improved methods to penetrate. The paintings themselves, scattered across different locations and hidden behind false identities, began their long journey through the underground art market. Some were sold to wealthy collectors who asked no questions about provenance, content to own beautiful works regardless of their origins. Others were traded between criminal organizations as high-value commodities, their artistic significance secondary to their monetary worth. A few disappeared into private collections so secretive that even their owners' identities remained unknown to all but a select few intermediaries. One painting, however, followed a different path. Fractured Light by Elena Vasquez ended up in the possession of someone who understood its true value extended beyond mere money. This individual, whose identity would remain hidden for decades, made a decision that would eventually crack the case wide open. Rather than simply hiding the painting or selling it for profit, they chose to preserve something far more valuable than the artwork itself. They documented the truth about the theft, recording details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the crime could have known. The recording was made on a small cassette tape, the kind commonly used in the late 1970s for personal audio recordings. The voice on the tape spoke in measured tones, describing events from that October night with precision and detail that matched nothing in the official police files. The speaker revealed information about the planning stages of the theft, the specific methods used to disable the security systems, and the network of individuals who had facilitated the crime. Most importantly, the recording named names, identifying the masterminds behind one of California's most puzzling art heists. But this evidence would not remain on a simple cassette tape where it might be lost, damaged, or discovered by the wrong people. Instead, the person who made the recording chose an extraordinary method of preservation. They carefully removed the canvas of Fractured Light from its stretcher, creating a small pocket between the painted surface and the backing material. The tiny cassette tape was sealed in waterproof material and inserted into this hidden space. Then the canvas was expertly remounted. To any casual observer, the painting appeared completely normal. Even professional art handlers would be unlikely to detect the modification without specialized equipment. This decision to hide the recording within the stolen artwork itself demonstrated either remarkable foresight or profound paranoia. The person who created this hidden evidence understood that the painting would eventually surface somewhere in the art world, and when it did, advanced authentication techniques might reveal its secret. They were essentially creating a time capsule, preserving testimony that could solve the crime decades after it had been committed. It was a gamble that required patience and faith that justice would eventually find a way. The modified painting continued its journey through the shadowy art market, changing hands multiple times over the following decades. Each new owner remained unaware of the treasure hidden within the canvas, seeing only a beautiful abstract work by an artist whose career had been shaped by tragedy. The painting hung in private homes, storage facilities, and occasionally in small galleries that specialized in works of questionable provenance. Through it all, the secret recording waited in silence, protected by layers of paint and canvas, counting down the years until technology would finally reveal its presence. By the early 2000s, X-ray technology had become a standard tool in art authentication, used to examine the underlying structure of paintings and detect previous restorations or hidden signatures. Museums and auction houses routinely subjected valuable works to these scans as part of their verification processes. The technology could reveal brushstrokes beneath the surface, show how artists had modified their compositions, and uncover previous damage or repairs. However, it was not typically used to search for hidden objects within the canvas itself, as such modifications were extremely rare and difficult to detect without specific knowledge of what to look for. The recording, hidden within fractured light, remained undetected through several ownership changes and even a few professional authentications. The small size of the cassette tape and its careful placement between canvas layers made it nearly invisible to standard examination techniques. The painting's legitimate artistic value provided perfect camouflage, drawing attention to Elena Vasquez's brushwork and color choices rather than to any structural anomalies. For more than 4 decades, the evidence that could solve the Meridian Gallery theft traveled through the art world in plain sight, waiting for the right combination of technology and curiosity to bring it to light. That moment finally arrived in the spring of 2023 at Desert Art Acquisitions, a mid-sized auction house in Phoenix that specialized in contemporary American works. The facility had built a reputation for thorough authentication processes, often uncovering forgotten masterpieces that had been misattributed or overlooked by previous owners. Their technical team, led by art conservator Dr. Sarah Chen, employed the latest digital imaging technology to examine every piece that passed through their doors. Fractured Light arrived at Desert Art Acquisitions through an estate sale in Scottsdale. The deceased collector, Harold Morrison, had amassed hundreds of artworks over 6 decades, most of them purchased through private dealers and smaller auction houses. His family, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the collection, had consigned the entire lot to be sold in batches. The Vasquez painting was part of a group of abstract works that Morrison had acquired sometime in the 1980s, though his records provided no clear documentation of when or where he had purchased it. Dr. Chen's initial examination of the painting revealed nothing unusual. The brushwork was consistent with Vasquez's known style from the mid-1970s, and the canvas showed appropriate aging for a work of that period. The signature appeared authentic, matching samples from the artist's other pieces. However, as part of their standard protocol, Chen's team subjected the painting to high-resolution X-ray analysis to check for any underlying sketches or previous compositions that might affect its attribution or value. The first scan produced an image that made Chen pause. Embedded within the canvas layers was a rectangular shadow that didn't correspond to any normal painting technique or material. The object appeared to be roughly 3 inches by 2 inches, positioned in the lower right quadrant of the canvas where Vasquez had painted a particularly dense area of overlapping geometric shapes. The shadow's sharp edges and uniform density suggested it was artificial, not a natural variation in the canvas weave or paint application. Chen had encountered hidden objects in paintings before, usually coins or small personal items that artists had incorporated as hidden signatures or good luck charms. However, this object was larger and more precisely positioned than anything she had seen. Its placement seemed deliberate, carefully chosen to avoid areas where the canvas might be stretched or handled roughly during framing. Someone had taken considerable care to ensure this object would remain undisturbed and protected. The auction house faced a delicate decision. Opening the canvas to examine the hidden object would potentially damage the painting and certainly affect its value if the modification proved to be unauthorized. However, the mysterious shadow raised questions about the work's authenticity and legal status that couldn't be ignored. After consulting with legal advisors and insurance representatives, Chen received permission to carefully investigate the anomaly. The process required extraordinary precision. Chen and her team worked in a controlled environment, using surgical tools and microscopic cameras to create a minimal opening in the canvas backing. They located the hidden object within hours, carefully extracting a small waterproof package that had been sealed with materials consistent with the 1970s technology. Inside the package was a standard cassette tape, its label marked only with the date November 15, 1975, written in blue ink. The discovery sent shockwaves through the auction house. A hidden audio recording in a painting was unprecedented in Chen's experience, and the date on the label was particularly significant. November 1975 was just 1 month after the Meridian Gallery theft, a case that remained famous in art recovery circles despite its age. Chen immediately contacted the FBI's art crime team, suspecting that the painting might be connected to the unsolved heist. Agent Maria Santos, who specialized in historical art theft cases, arrived in Phoenix within 48 hours. She brought with her a portable cassette player and the complete FBI file on the Meridian Gallery case, including photographs of all the stolen works. The moment she saw fractured light, Santos knew they had found one of the missing pieces. The painting matched the police photographs exactly, down to minor details in the brushwork and a small scratch near the artist's signature that had been documented in 1975. Playing the cassette tape proved more challenging than expected. The audio quality was poor after nearly 5 decades of storage, and portions of the recording had degraded beyond comprehension. However, enough remained audible to provide stunning revelations about the theft. The voice on the tape belonged to someone who claimed to have been present during the planning meetings for the robbery, and the speaker provided details about the crime that had never been made public. The recording revealed that the theft had been orchestrated by a group of 4 individuals, including 2 gallery employees and a professional burglar with expertise in electrical systems. The speaker identified himself only as M, but provided specific information about how the group had accessed the gallery's security plans, disabled the power grid, and transported the stolen paintings to a warehouse in Tijuana. Most shocking was the revelation that the night watchman, George Castellanos, had been an active participant rather than an innocent victim. According to the recording, Castellanos had provided the thieves with detailed information about the gallery's security protocols, including the timing of his rounds and the locations of motion sensors. He had deliberately avoided the exhibition areas during the power outage, giving the other members of the group time to remove the paintings without detection. His reported head injury had been self-inflicted to support his cover story, and his confusion about the timeline had been carefully rehearsed. The voice on the tape also revealed the existence of a detailed written plan that had been hidden in a safety deposit box in Chula Vista. The speaker provided the bank's name and a box number, though he warned that the key had been given to someone whose identity he would not reveal. This information gave investigators their first concrete lead in the case since 1975, a potential treasure trove of evidence that could finally solve one of California's most enduring art mysteries. Agent Santos worked quickly to verify the information on the recording. Background checks confirmed that George Castellanos had indeed left San Diego abruptly in 1979, moving to Nevada, where he had worked under a slightly different name. Bank records from Chula Vista showed that a safety deposit box matching the number mentioned on the tape had been rented in November 1975 under the name M. Rodriguez, but the box had been abandoned in 1983 when rental payments stopped. The contents of the abandoned box had been turned over to the state according to standard procedures, but tracking down those materials required extensive research through multiple government agencies. Santos discovered that the box had contained a folder of documents, several photographs, and a small notebook, all of which had been stored in a state warehouse for unclaimed property. After 40 years in storage, the materials were in fragile condition, but they remained largely intact. The notebook proved to be the most valuable find. Written in the same hand as the cassette label, it contained detailed plans for the Meridian Gallery theft, including floor plans of the building, guard schedules, and a list of target paintings. The notebook also identified the 4 members of the theft ring by their full names, providing investigators with information that had eluded them for decades. Most importantly, it revealed the location where the stolen paintings had initially been hidden and the network of dealers who had helped disperse them. The photographs in the safety deposit box showed the stolen paintings in what appeared to be a warehouse setting, confirming that they had indeed been taken to Mexico as described in the audio recording. Some of the images included partial views of individuals handling the artworks, though their faces were not clearly visible. However, forensic analysis of the photographs revealed background details that helped investigators identify the specific location where the pictures had been taken. Armed with this new evidence, the FBI reopened the Meridian Gallery case as an active investigation. The recording had provided not just names and locations, but a comprehensive understanding of how the theft had been planned and executed. For the first time in nearly 5 decades, investigators had solid leads to follow and specific individuals to question. The discovery had transformed an ice-cold case into one of the most promising art recovery operations in recent memory. The identity of M, the person who had made the recording and hidden it within the painting, remained a mystery. However, his decision to preserve this evidence had finally given the victims of the 1975 theft hope for justice and recovery. The voice on the tape had taken an enormous risk to document the truth, understanding that someday the hidden recording might be the key to solving the crime. That day had finally arrived, 48 years after the paintings had vanished into the night. The breakthrough discovery sent ripples through law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Within weeks of authenticating the cassette tape, FBI agents had located and interviewed 2 of the 4 conspirators named in the hidden recording. George Castellanos, the former night watchman, was found living under an assumed name in Las Vegas, where he had worked casino security for over 3 decades. When confronted with the evidence from the tape, his carefully constructed alibi finally crumbled. Castellanos admitted to his role in the theft, revealing details that perfectly matched the information preserved in Elena Vasquez's painting. He confirmed that the group had spent months planning the operation, studying the gallery's routines, and identifying the most valuable portable works. The electrical expertise had come from Marcus Torres, a former utility worker who had been recruited specifically for his knowledge of San Diego's power grid. Torres had died in 1998, taking many of the technical details of the operation with him. The third conspirator, identified in the recording as David Chen, had served as the group's connection to black market art dealers. Chen had used his legitimate job at a shipping company to transport the stolen paintings across the Mexican border, where they were temporarily stored before being distributed to various buyers. When agents tracked him down in Bakersfield, Chen was initially reluctant to cooperate, but the overwhelming evidence from the cassette eventually convinced him to provide a full confession. The identity of M, the mysterious 4th member who had created the recording, proved more elusive. The handwriting analysis and voice comparison techniques available in 2023 were far more sophisticated than those used in the original investigation, but they still couldn't definitively identify the speaker. However, Chen's testimony provided crucial context. According to him, M had been the intellectual architect of the theft, a man with extensive knowledge of both art, history, and criminal networks who had brought the group together. Chen revealed that M had grown increasingly paranoid in the months following the theft, convinced that one of the others would eventually betray the group to authorities. The decision to record a detailed confession and hide it within one of the stolen paintings had been his insurance policy, a way to ensure that if he were ever arrested or killed, the truth about the crime would eventually surface. It was a calculated gamble that demonstrated both criminal cunning and an unexpected sense of justice. The investigation team faced a complex challenge in recovering the remaining 6 stolen paintings. The cassette recording and safety deposit box documents provided leads, but 4 decades had passed since the works had been scattered across the underground art market. Some had likely been sold multiple times, their current owners potentially unaware of their criminal origins. Others might have been destroyed, damaged, or lost entirely during their journey through the shadows. Agent Santos coordinated with international law enforcement agencies, focusing on the Mexican dealers and collectors who had been identified in the recovered documents. Several of the paintings were traced to private collections in Guadalajara and Mexico City, where wealthy buyers had acquired them through intermediaries who claimed they were legitimate estate sales. The recovery process required delicate negotiations, as many of these collectors had held the works for decades and considered themselves innocent purchasers. 2 additional paintings were located in the United States, having been sold through a network of dealers who specialized in works with questionable provenance. One had ended up in a private collection in Houston, where it had hung unrecognized for over 20 years. The other had been donated to a small museum in Colorado, where staff had never questioned its origins or connected it to the famous San Diego theft. Elena Vasquez, now in her 70s and living in New Mexico, received the news of her painting's recovery with mixed emotions. The artwork had launched her career in the most tragic way possible, and its return felt like closing a chapter that had defined her life for nearly 5 decades. She was particularly moved to learn about the hidden recording, understanding that someone had risked everything to preserve evidence that would eventually lead to justice. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the passage of time and the jurisdictional issues involved in prosecuting a decades-old crime. While Castellanos and Chen faced charges related to their confessions, the statute of limitations had expired on many aspects of the original theft. However, federal prosecutors were able to pursue charges related to the transportation of stolen goods across state and international borders, crimes that carried longer limitation periods. Margaret Whitfield, the former gallery owner who had rebuilt her life after the devastating theft, was contacted by investigators as the case neared its resolution. She had followed the art world's recovery efforts over the years, never quite believing she would see her stolen exhibition pieces again. The news that advanced technology had finally cracked the case felt like vindication for all the suspicions and theories that had haunted her since 1975. The recovered paintings underwent extensive conservation work to repair damage sustained during their decades in hiding. Fractured light required special attention due to the modifications made to conceal the cassette tape, but expert conservators were able to restore it to its original condition. The work would eventually be returned to Elena Vasquez, who decided to donate it to the San Diego Museum of Art as a permanent reminder of how truth can survive even the most elaborate attempts to bury it. The final count showed that 5 of the 7 stolen paintings were successfully recovered, a remarkable outcome for a case that had been dormant for nearly half a century. The remaining 2 works were believed to have been destroyed or lost during their journey through the criminal underworld, casualties of a theft that had torn apart lives and careers in pursuit of profit. The Meridian Gallery case officially closed in late 2023, marked not by dramatic arrests or courtroom victories, but by the quiet satisfaction of questions finally answered. The hidden cassette tape had accomplished exactly what its creator had intended, preserving testimony that outlasted fear, greed, and the passage of time itself. In the end, it wasn't sophisticated police work or advanced forensics that solved the crime, but one person's decision to trust that someday, somehow, the truth would find its way to the surface. The story serves as a testament to both human ingenuity and the persistent power of evidence, proving that even the most carefully planned crimes carry within them the seeds of their own resolution. Sometimes justice requires patience, waiting decades for the right combination of technology, circumstance, and courage to bring hidden truths into the light.